Hey there, everybody. How's it going? It is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We were going to come on last night, but some things have kind of gotten in the way a little bit. But we are coming at you now in a quiet day two after some moves by the Bengals on day one of the legal tampering period of free agency. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran, the man, the myth, the legend. And this is easy for me. My kids are eating dinner, and we've got things kind of set up on my end. But it is late for you and many who are watching this show. John, how are you, man? You hanging in there with all the news? I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of news, but kind of not with the Bengals, right?
Oh, things were flying all over the place today. Like you had Marco Wilson signing, and then you had Marco Wilson signing, and
crickets.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, it's good that we're doing it now at this time. Like, we wanted to do this as late as, not as possible. We could go a little bit later, but as late as comfortably possible, because a quick story time here. 2 years ago, the Bengals were doing absolutely nothing in the opening part of free agency in 2023. And a couple of my friends, I don't know why they wanted to go out to a bar on Wednesday night in the middle of the week, but I'm like, I'm at my desk. I'm waiting for anything to cover with this team. It's not going to happen. Whatever. I'll get a drink and, have a decent night. I get to the bar. I get a drink. I sit down at the high top. I open my phone, and all of a sudden Orlando Brown Jr. signs a 4-year deal.
Of course.
With the Bengals?
Of course.
I'm not there. I waited 72 hours for something to do, and now I'm at a bar and it happened. So consider this like a way to maybe spark something by us being busy doing something that isn't covering the team with articles that we normally do as our jobs, as a way to maybe get something happening, because nothing has happened, I think, in the last officially 26 hours or so.
What did you do when that occurred? Did you finish your drink? Did you bail? I mean, I don't know.
It just led to a long night. Like, there's nothing I could do at that point. There's no use really in getting an article out at 10:30 at night anyways. So I stayed up until like 2:30 writing a pretty decently long piece about the implications of the deal and everything like that. And it still did well in terms of hits and everything like that. So that's a trick of the trade, I think. Like, when you have something to write at night, just post in the morning when everyone's waking up, and you'll end up doing better.
And wonderful friend of the show, Orlando Brown Jr., who joined us shortly after free agency back then. So go check out that interview. Shameless plug there. But I'm glad you were still able to enjoy some semblance of the evening, John, and then go do what you need to do. But this is the Orange and Black Insider, part of the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. BLEAV, in case you want to know how that's spelled. It's a little different. BLEAV in Cincy podcast channel, part of the Believe podcast network of national shows. And you can get this show, 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends, as well as Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and Willie Letts, who are on Twitter, at least. They are not short on any takes of a lot of stuff. So go follow them. Go subscribe to the channel through your favorite audio streamer. And if you like the video side of things, you can get this show on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel underneath John Sheeran's side, the bottom right-hand side. If you are tuning into YouTube, you can click the show icon underneath there and do the whole deal. Subscribe, bell, thumbs up, all the stuff. We appreciate that. And we'll be bringing you all kinds of stuff, not only during free agency, but the draft and all kinds of different things coming up here. We've got a lot on tap for you, not only recapping just where, I don't know if you want to call it a scorecard or whatever, just comings and goings with the Cincinnati Bengals, at least to this point, trying to catch up. And then, of course, we'll talk about the new guys, their potential impacts, the outside signings, and the internal guys too, their impacts on the Bengals, where they are at with things, what may be next, and of course, the latest on some of the big names that are still kind of lingering out there in terms of extensions, etc. So appreciate you all tuning in live. This is very late. I appreciate it, but we are bringing you all kinds of. We intentionally kind of went late because we thought some stuff may be coming down the pipe. I mean, hell, it could be coming on while we always joke. It's like, oh, when we're away from the computer, just like your story, right, John? It's like when you kind of get some semblance of life or a break or something happens, but such is the business, such is the nature of the NFL, and there are some other rumors coming out, so we'll talk about that too. This show is brought to you in part by FOCO, as well as CincyJungle.com and A to Z Sports.com, where John is doing a lot of great stuff covering the AFC North and the Bengals there, along with the team over there. So go check out both sites. Check out FOCO for all kinds of exclusive Bengals stuff, all kinds of different stuff, slippers and hats and all kinds of different stuff. It's still a little my way. It's raining. It's still a little chilly. So if you want those FOCO, sheepskin insert shoes to kind of relax, go for it. But anyway, all right, we've got a lot to get to. We have a lot to get to, John. And let's start off with the comings and goings of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the goings have actually been a little bit slower, right? I mean, it hasn't been so many Bengals players leaving via free agency. And that may or may not be an indictment of what they've done or haven't done the past few years, right? I mean, it's just kind of like, after they made the Super Bowl and after they made the AFC championship, I don't want to say they got fleeced, but a lot of their star players left. And so now it's just their players aren't in as high demand. And I actually want to get your take not only on that, but this Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated just kind of put it out there, I think late Monday night, saying, people are kind of wondering where's the activity. Well, this is kind of a weaker free agent market overall in terms of the big names, the quarterbacks, the big, all the big moves. So I kind of want to get your take on both of those. Do you agree with him, and or are you surprised where the Bengals are at this point in terms of pluses and minuses on the roster?
It's definitely a weaker class. There was the whole talk about the start of it was that the joke was it was going to last 13 seconds and then it would be over. And that obviously didn't actually happen, but there was a lot more activity on day one of legal negotiating with everyone else. And it was evident when there were a lot of trades before all this started anyways. Like the Bears went out of their way to make sure they got 2 starting guards. The Steelers didn't mess around and traded for DK Metcalf and probably paid a pretty penny in order to do so. There was a lot of activity before everyone got a chance to sign this free agency class. And I think for the most part, a lot of the notable deals that you've seen have not been praised necessarily. I think the general consensus is that, with the salary cap going up, prices of contracts are also going to reflect that. Like everyone always says that, the cap is going up, there's so much space to sign these guys, but they don't realize that inflation exists when the cap goes up, and then the prices reflect that. And then all of a sudden, left tackles like Dan Moore Jr. are getting $20.5 million per year compared to when Orlando Brown Jr. signed for $16 million a couple years ago, which still, relative to what the salary cap was 2 years ago, is still cheaper than what Dan Moore Jr. got. So that is the cost of being desperate to sign guys in free agency and fill needs when the market is very dry at a lot of those spots. So it doesn't surprise me that this is kind of how free agency has kind of gone on. And with the Bengals, even when they've been active in the past 5 years, the schedule of their inactivity is always kind of varied. Sometimes they're really quiet on Monday, and then all of a sudden they explode on Tuesday and Wednesday. Sometimes they go right out of the gate on Monday, which is kind of what they did a little bit yesterday, even though it was a little bit later in the day, and now it was radio silence today. But just because, Anthony, there haven't been any signings does not mean that nothing is getting done. In fact, when you don't hear about anything, that's when most of the work is actually happening, because they're not always on the phone. They're not always, adjusting offers and everything like that. It's a lot of just phone calls with agents, and then agents calling other teams, and then waiting to hear back from agents about what other offers were. And sometimes it's just sending an offer out there. It's a final offer. Let the player and his agent decide. And then you move on to the next player, and you take another call, and all these things are happening simultaneously, even if there's no signing. As much as we criticize the Bengals front office, they're not just asleep right now. Like they're still working the phones. That's what every team is doing. And all of a sudden, just when you think a market for a certain position is doing nothing, it then has movement, and then one signing happens, and another signing, because people are just have cold feet. And as soon as that one signing happens, then everything starts to get moving. And that's what we've kind of seen at some of these positions, and kind of how the Bengals have been going with it.
Such is the case with the interior of both lines in free agency. It feels like, there was there were a couple of contracts that were given out and you kind of go, whoa, okay. But then since, the interior lines have been a little cooling, and I say that tongue in cheek because we are still on night 2 of the legal tampering period. So I get that. But the Bengals, the positions now that they are probably pivoting towards are positions that they have not traditionally overvalued or valued as much as other positions. So, and that being, again, the interior of both offensive and defensive lines. So now you look at, okay, what are they going to do? How are they negotiating? What's going to happen here? And like you said, I think when you go back to the last couple of years where they had a few big signings, you can go back and say, well, actually it was kind of day 2, day 3, where you're like, hey, now they're really, springing for things. So this is kind of what they do. And I don't say that to defend them by any means or anything like that, but this is kind of what they do in the respect of, hey, a little bit of a reactive nature. Now, there are some rumors that they are being proactive at some other positions. We'll get to that in just a little bit, but let's recap at least a little bit of what the Bengals have done, or, the comings and goings of the team, as we mentioned earlier here. And not a lot of goings per se. And the goings have been guys that they cut to make salary cap space for moves that they want to make. And then, some of the moves that they haven't, that they've made outside have not been super splashy, but solid. We'll talk about that in a minute. You talk about the notable departures. Alex Kappa, we didn't talk about this last episode. He, 2 days later, signed with the Raiders on a pretty lucrative deal shortly after he was released by the Bengals. And then Sheldon Rankins just doing the Bengals dirty there. And granted, I say that tongue in cheek because I know he was ill last year, but going back to the Texans. And then you go back to the re-signings a lot. Cody Ford, Tanner Hudson, Jackson Kirkland, Mike Gesicki, a nice deal right before free agency, a 3-year deal there. Cam Grandy, Cal Adamitis, the punter Ryan Rico, who had a great rookie year with the team. Of course, we can't talk about this without T. Higgins and the franchise tag placed there. The team is working on a long-term deal. BJ Hill, some people thought that he was maybe not going to be back with the team. He signed another 3-year deal with the Bengals. And then, of course, late on Monday night, Joseph Osai re-signs a 1-year, $7 million deal with the Bengals. So you see there, it's tight end heavy, a little bit defensive line heavy in terms of their re-signings that they brought aboard there. Cody Ford, a lot of people are talking about guard and what are the Bengals going to do there. Cody Ford, to me, is the bench guy that, and we'll talk further about this in just a minute, but he's the bench guy that comes off and can kind of be a swing player for a lot of other positions on the offensive line. And then the outside signings so far, linebacker Oren Burks, running back Samaje Perine coming back to the Bengals. Welcome back, 34. And defensive end Ted Arell, also known as TJ Slayton, a big boy, coming to play nose tackle for the Cincinnati Bengals. And those are the places that they decided to at least, I don't want to say splash, but make some, notable signings at the onset of free agency from the outside looking in. And look, I mean, I guess that the low hanging fruit and the easiest place to start would be Samaje Perine. You kind of look back and you go, man, why didn't we just do this thing 2 years ago? There was a comparable deal when he signed with the Broncos, and basically the Bengals had that same, more or less, from what I understand, is the same deal on the table. And Samaje Perine said, well, look, I mean, here's the deal. I can be a starterish type of player in Denver. That never materialized. And then, now he is back. He went to the Chiefs and was a fine role player there. We all know the Chiefs and Bengals, especially now in free agency, since this rivalry has ensued over the past couple of years, the Bengals have and Chiefs have swapped players or chased players, that sort of thing. And now Samaje Perine is back with the Cincinnati Bengals, a guy who was a waiver wire claim in Zach Taylor's at the right before the season. In Zach Taylor's very first year as head coach. He was a special teamer, didn't do much the first couple of years, and then became this kind of third down back, this all-around back. Look, it's a cheap deal. I like it for the sake of not only what he brings you on 3 downs, but John, I mean, it's pass pro. We talked about supplementing Chase Brown with that quote unquote bigger back, the third down back, the tougher back. I understand the age. I understand, well, why now? All of those questions, but it makes sense. They know what they're getting from him. They know what they want to get out of him. And a guy who, I guess, once again, had a comparable deal, I believe, from the Buccaneers, if I'm not mistaken, on the table, and decided to say, hey, I'm going back to Cincinnati.
Can we please talk about this? Because I almost my biggest conspiracy theory right now is that the Bengals leaked a report to Aaron Wilson, who is a fine reporter based in Houston.
Yeah,
Aaron Wilson reported that Samaje Perine had agreed to a 3-year, $22 million deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And everyone went ballistic because they couldn't believe that such a thing was true. It turns out it wasn't. It was Jason Licht, the GM of the Bucs, who flat out said, no, we did not. Firm denial that we paid Samaje Perine $7.5 million per year. And then not even an hour later, the Bengals came in and agreed to a 2-year, $3.6 million deal. So if there were optics about Samaje Perine coming back at an older age and as the first external signing that the Bengals made, doing that right after it was reported that he could have gotten $7 million a year from another team that was in the playoffs last year, I don't know. Tinfoil hat off. Just to talk about Samaje Perine, perfectly fine, right? Just RB2, RB3 at worst. I think the deal kind of reflects that of an RB3 with a draft pick kind of coming in to be like the main complement to Chase Brown. But I think obviously they didn't have any depth at that position last year, and it really hurt them towards the later part of the year when Chase Brown got hurt. Someone who obviously knows the system, has Joe Burrow's trust, can handle pass protection, can handle both catching the ball and converting on short down and distance. So the contract is not extreme by any means. He doesn't have a single cent of guaranteed money, so they can move on from him whenever they want, and that just happened to be his market. So whatever the position group looks like, I think they have options to have him as the second back behind Chase Brown, or maybe third back to kind of round out the group, because he does also have a lot of special teams experience as well.
I just think, look, the first portion of the Bengals free agency period and these outside signings especially point to, look, these are super basic elements of our team and our roster that have been lacking the last couple of years. And you could point to locker room leadership. I think a lot of people liked Samaje Perine in that locker room. BJ Hill as well, the re-signing there. I think they just said, we're not tackling well. We're not picking up pass protection well from our running backs. And I mean, we are not stopping the run well. And so those 3 signings on the outside, from the outside coming back in, you say, okay, maybe it doesn't move the excitement needle a ton, but you say, let's just get back to basic things. Let's get back to things that got us to where we were in 21 and 22. Let's get these players that we know can do these fundamental things that can, I mean, not only get you competitive in the AFC North, but through the AFC North. And I think that's where Perine makes a lot of sense. I don't know that he's going to have the same high, I call it a high profile role. I don't know if he's going to have the same amount of snaps or the same kind of role that he necessarily had a handful of years back with the Bengals. But I think the Bengals get this guy and they go, we know exactly what we are getting from this guy. We know exactly, even if it's limited, we know exactly what we're getting from this guy. Oren Burks, a guy that not a lot of people were talking about, right? I mean, I think it was just a guy that was out there and semi-reserve, rotational guy, has kind of been in and out of the starting lineup for a number of teams. Had a nice stretch with the Eagles down through their Super Bowl run there, and he ended up showing that he can make tackles. He can make tackles he's an impact player, and he's a sound tackler. And the Bengals have lacked that at the linebacker position. Now, granted, they lost Akeem Davis-Gaither, as you saw in that video there, to the Cardinals there, an athletic guy that can do a lot of different things. But I think Oren Burks brings stability. I think TJ Slayton brings an element where you go back to the Bengals and what they were trying to do in the interior of the defensive line in the 21 and 22 seasons, where you say, okay, you had BJ Hill, you had Larry Ogunjobi only for 1 year, you had DJ Reader, and you had Josh Tupou, right? A lot of beef when you needed it in the AFC North, and a lot of just kind of versatility, big playability. Now, Slayton's not going to get you the pass rush stuff. We know that, but he is a giant guy, a lot of attitude. And when you play Derrick Henry twice a year, you play athletic quarterbacks, you do all of these things that you need your defensive linemen to be stout at the point of attack. I think that makes a lot of sense, as does Burks, even though, again, these are guys where you go, well, this maybe wasn't on the top of my list, but this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, let's start with Burks here. I think the timing of his signing or his agreement, because I don't want to officially call these signings because they haven't put pen to paper yet. That timing combined with Akeem Davis-Gaither agreeing to a tier deal with the Cardinals like minutes later, I don't think was a coincidence. I think they realized that Davis-Gaither was gone, and that is where they kind of pivoted. I don't know if they had extreme interest in bringing Davis-Gaither back, but he was by far their most experienced special teamer over the past 5 years. Darren Simmons is still here. They know that they're going to have turnover at the linebacker position anyways. Al Golden kind of referred to his defense being obviously a 4-3 base, but how much of that are you going to see in the modern NFL? Probably not as much as you used to, but still, I think you might see it more compared to the defense that Luna Rumo was running. So the need for 3 starting caliber linebackers, I think, is a little bit more pressing. And if you lose Davis-Gaither, you need someone who can not only fill in the special teams role, but someone who maybe becoming an ascending starter at linebacker. And Burks is going to be 38 this year, so he's kind of a late bloomer in that sense, but played a ton of special teams at Green Bay. Finally got on the defense on the field a little bit more with San Francisco. In the last couple of years, he played in that Super Bowl that they lost to the Chiefs, and then he joins the Eagles. He gets cut before the season. He gets elevated because of injuries. He's starting in the playoffs because Nakobe Dean goes down with a season-ending knee injury, and he balls out in the postseason. Yep. He plays phenomenal against the Chiefs. Now, obviously, it could just be we're looking at an amazing Eagles defense that's coordinated by a phenomenal defense coordinator in Vic Fangio, and maybe that's just that boosted everything that Oren Burks was. But great athlete in space, someone who can play in space and drop back in coverage and make good tackles in space. A lot of the things the Bengals were missing at linebacker. So for 2 years, $5 million. Very solid signing. And I think TJ Slayton in a vacuum is a very solid signing as well. They didn't have a nose tackle last year, Anthony. They tried to go into the season without that position filled, and it bit him in the butt because they could not withstand combo blocks. They had no one on the roster that could take on a double team, and teams pounded it down their throat for 17 weeks, right? They tried to have BJ Hill do that. They tried to have Chris Jenkins do that. They tried to have McKinley Jackson do that when he was healthy. None of them could do it. TJ Slaton could do it. That's what he was best at with Green Bay under Jerry Montgomery for those first 3 years of his career. That's when he played his best football. They had a defensive change last year, so he didn't play nearly as good, but he was still effective when he was in those spots that he was in his first few years. So that's that Jerry Montgomery signing 100 times out of 100 there is someone that he knows that can play nose for them. I think, Anthony, though, that while TJ Slaton, great signing in vacuum, I think BJ Hill also brings you value at that deal. I think a lot of people thought he was going to be gone because he's going to get a little bit more money. So he comes back at what I deem to be a little bit of a discount. Having both of them as your starting defensive tackles, it gives me pause because you don't have a true pass rushing defensive tackle on this roster right now. That's not Chris Jenkins Jr. yet. It's not McKinley Jackson. Those guys were never that in college. It's very tough to project them becoming that in the pros. That's 4 defensive tackles. You're typically only activating 4 on game days. I question the plan here. Obviously, there was an emphasis on getting better against the run, and that was very clear with what they were talking about the combine. But I think this group still needs someone with juice who can win a one-on-one on those 3rd and longs, because I don't think it's BJ Hill necessarily as much as he was that guy a couple of years ago. It's definitely not TJ Slaton. I question the overall plan here, even though in a vacuum these signings are solid and I think makes sense.
So I think they fill roles, and I think they are. I mean, Slayton's going to be a 1 or 2 down guy. I think we know that, and I'm with you. But I think the limited free agency class also kind of handcuffs you a little bit on that, right? I mean, I think you don't have that Geno Atkins out there that's ready to be, that true disruptor. Now, maybe they're saying, hey, we can find that in the draft in the middle of the 1st round, maybe even in the 2nd round. But I'm with you. They need to get, and I'm not even saying get a Geno Atkins, because that is a Hall of Fame caliber player, but you need to get a guy that is today's NFL, that can disrupt the interior of the pocket. That is what you need. I think this is, again, the Bengals have always said we are approaching free agency with needs. We're going to focus in and then out. That may have changed a little bit over the past couple of years, but that's kind of been the philosophy. And I think it's like, I understand how these signings, P. Ryan, Burks, and Slaton aren't, getting people out of their seats necessarily, but these are basic things that the Bengals need to fix that these guys bring. Basic things. And so now they can maybe have a little bit more fun and or shore up more needs, whether that is in the interior line or other areas. So I get what you're saying for sure. It's not one of those things where it's like, hey, that is the game-changing player. But I mean, what do? Do you go Javon Kinlaw for the? Yeah, I mean, there are a number of different things where you go, wow, teams kind of overpaid for some players that are average or injury riddled or all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people have said, 2-3 years down the road, these are contracts that, you try and get out of to reinsert yourself into free agency again. So that's where I think the Bengals, where I see the savviness, but I am also frustrated with you as well, because there has not been extensions to key players. There has not been that, wow, that's that player. Hey, this is a player that makes a lot of sense. So I get that. But again, I think this is like, as lame as it sounds for a team that has been to 2 AFC championships in the last handful of years and have barely missed the playoffs the last couple of years, this is fundamental, basic stuff that these guys bring that they need to have in this division. So I get that. I'm a little disappointed that they were not more active on day 2. There are more rumors going out there. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes about, maybe some other areas that they are trying to address. But in the same vein, I'm not happy, but I'm not completely going. I'm not sitting here saying I don't understand the logic, because I think there are some very basic fundamental issues, particularly on defense, that they needed to address. And a couple of these signings make a lot of sense in that regard. That does not mean that they will not supplement those positions or similar-ish positions in the draft, high in the draft. But I get the logic to some degree.
Yeah, like there's obviously the alternative options that ended up materializing for other teams. I don't think I would have advised him to sign Milt Williams at the price that he got, and I don't think they were swimming in those waters anyways.
No.
Levi Onwuzurike was a name that we kind of brought up, and he's still out there. So it's tough to say that the Bengals should have signed him when no one else has signed him yet. And there's, I guess, just still a possibility that comes together if his market really dries up. Puna Ford was also someone that I think should have had interest, and he signed a relatively similar deal compared to BJ Hill. But yeah, like I think again, the BJ Hill contract is fine. I just think that when you drafted Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson last year, you would have thought that the plan would have been for one of them to kind of fill those shoes, because you just have a lot of the same type of player at defensive tackle now, and you still need someone else to kind of round out that group. So obviously there are caveats here with it just being the first 2 days of free agency, and you have to recognize that there are still guys out there that could fill in the rest of the picture and everything like that. But it's just right now, it's an unfinished picture, right? It's an unfinished puzzle that just a lot of pieces are scattered around everywhere, and you're trying to fill everything in. And with luck, it turns into a competent, pretty looking picture. But at the moment, it's very unfinished.
It's unfinished, and we kind of felt like we knew that was maybe. And again, we talked about the Bengals being reactive instead of proactive in many ways, especially in free agency, where they say, okay, let's monitor some contracts. It's a little bit what they've done with some of their stars as well. Reactive versus proactive, and what is the top one or two guys out there? What did they get in their contracts, and what should we expect out there? But I think they're going to do some more things. How big of splashes, I don't know, but they will supplement some things. And again, there could be more of those rental deals out there that they supplement certain position groups with 1 to 2 year deals that are manageable, palatable from the team's perspective, that you say, okay, this is a Band-Aid. Maybe then some of these draft picks that come up make sense. But the interesting thing, and we'll talk more Trey Hendrickson at the end of the show, but the interesting thing there as you look at the re-signings was the Joseph Osai situation, because the Bengals have had an interest in Azeez Ojulari for, when he was on the trade block last year. And now potentially, there's reports from numerous beat reporters that they were interested in his services again. It didn't make sense. So then I don't want to say they pivoted to Joseph Osai. I'm sure they probably had him in some form of their thought process. But then they said, you know what, let's get this guy 1 year, $7 million, and kind of make it make sense. I think Osai kind of gambled on himself a little bit. He probably knew that the defensive performance from the Bengals over the last couple of years was not up to snuff. Maybe he was kind of an unfair indictment of that, but he came on really strong at the end of the year there, and maybe he's a guy with increased snaps, a new defensive coordinator, a new vision, and if the Bengals continue to supplement the defensive line, be it through the free agency or the draft, he's a guy who could benefit from that. So I think that signing makes a lot of sense. He's 24. He's been in the league a handful of years. There's been injuries. You just kind of wait for him to show, to meet that potential, right? So that's another signing on the defensive line where you say, okay, again, doesn't move the needle a lot because he was on the team last year. We've seen flashes, but there's been a lot of injuries and other issues. But I'm cautiously optimistic about that signing, and again, provides depth at a spot with a lot of questions, particularly with the Hendrickson situation.
Yeah, I have no issues with $7 million for 1 year of Joseph Osai, presumably that he has a bigger role and he's not going to be buried on the bench like he was for the past 4 years. And part of that was due to injuries and everything like that. But you just saw so clearly and evident how much better he was finishing at the quarterback compared to, unfortunately, a very injured Sam Hubbard at the end of his career.
Friend of the show. Yes.
I want to make that very clear. But yes, like the 3.5 sacks or 2.5 sacks that he had in the last three games, like that wasn't a coincidence. Like the whole pass rush was feeding a little bit better, and he was flashing. And obviously, he was motivated being in the contract year and everything like that. But I think things changed last week when obviously Trey Hendrickson did what he did and sought out a trade and everything. And I think that brought the Bengals back to the table with Osai a little bit and said, hey, if this does happen and we have a gigantic hole at edge, might as well bring back someone that we know who would be very motivated to play more and then earn a larger contract next year. And the guy who's negotiating that contract is none other than the man who must not be named, David Mulligetta. So the Bengals had to fend off other teams. I know it was the Indianapolis Colts who now have Lou Anarumo who were interested in Joseph Osai. I think the Arizona Cardinals were also kind of in the mix as well. And the Bengals made an offer to Osai. They were in that discussion the entire day Monday. So this narrative that the Bengals only focus on one player at a time, not true. No team actually does that. Again, multiple conversations are happening at once. They signed Oren Burks, and then they closed the deal on Osai, and they actually signed a veteran contract that David Mulligetta negotiated. So congrats to them. Finally got across that goal line, even though it was just a very minimal one-year deal, but it makes sense. All right. If you don't know if Hendrickson is going to be here, and that situation is so far up in the air, it's hard to just rationalize at this point. Might as well bring back someone that is on track to play more and maybe be a great value for that deal if he does end up being a full-time starter.
I don't know if a one year $7 million contract, I don't even know where the bridges were burned or if they're burned there with Mulligetta and Athletes First.
Oh, it's relative.
I mean, at a minimum, we can say, hey, the deal got done there. So maybe there's some semblance of communication and agreement between that agent where the Bengals have had some issues in the past. Nate Johnson says this, and this is kind of where I always go when I'm a team entering free agency, namely the Bengals. And granted, sometimes it's a premature question, but I always say, how are you better? What have you done over the past X amount of days to make your team better? And Nate Johnson says, I feel like we only got better at nose tackle, and that's it. Granted, we are, I don't know, 36 hours into free agency at this point. But my question has always been, how are you better? Right now, I don't see the Bengals being exponentially better based on the outside signings, the re-signings that they have made. Now, a lot of traction can be made over the next couple of days and weeks and rental deals, that sort of thing. But that's where my concern, I get the P. Ryan signing because of the reasons I mentioned: pass protection, versatility, a little bit of depth and durability at running back. I mean, you saw when he came in for Mixon in a couple of games, he came in and was extremely productive. So if, God forbid, Chase Brown goes down, you can kind of say, okay, P. Ryan, you're our guy this week, and expect a decent amount of production there. But I don't see the Bengals having exponentially helping themselves or bettering their roster as of this point. Again, we are very early in the process. So I think, again, there are little elements where you say, okay, you probably improved your run defense with the Slayton acquisition. You probably helped out in some elements of pass pro and depth at running back. You probably helped out some tackling issues. Is he a starter? Is he not with Oren Burks? That's my concern. And maybe, again, everybody feels like if you keep Trey, you keep T, you extend, and everybody's happy. You've got this Super Bowl roster. I still think there are other elements of this team, namely guard, namely IDL. This team needs to improve to say, okay, now we are ready to really take that next step from 9 wins-ish from the last couple of years and get back to the AFC Championship. And that's, again, it's an indictment of the free agency class, but it's also a little bit of, hey, let's be aggressive. Let's really improve the roster that we need in the areas in which we need to improve it.
Yeah, the lack of quality free agents in this class has nothing to do with the fact that right before free agency started, the Bengals couldn't get a deal done with either T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, and they couldn't get a deal done with Trey Hendrickson. If at least one of those happened, I think the optics would be better. I think you'd have some confirmation that there's future stability at those very important spots. It was going to be tough, I think, for the Bengals to improve their pass rush without spending a decent amount of money And that hasn't really happened yet with that specific need. And they haven't signed a guard yet. But that's, I think, a good way to transition now, because the Bengals didn't sign a guard in day one of free agency. I thought that was going to be the first position that they signed, because it seemed like on the surface that it wasn't very deep of a class at at guard, and maybe the options would drive very quickly, and the Bengals had to get in and get out, just like they did with Alex Kappa a couple of years ago. It was not the case. They addressed the defensive line first, which is not a bad thing, because for the most part, the guard market has not moved tremendously. Yes, James Daniels signed with the Dolphins. Patrick McCarry signed with the Jaguars. There was a couple of others that I'm missing at the moment, but there's still decent options that I think the Bengals would have interest in, including Tevin Jenkins, which I think is what everyone's wondering right now, because starting today, there was rumors about the Bengals being interested in Tevin Jenkins, and Tevin Jenkins is entering his 5th year. He was in that same 2021 draft class that Jackson Carman was. The Bengals passed on him. I think unofficially he didn't pass his physical with the Bengals all the way back then, which is why he dropped it to the second round entirely. There was a back thing with him, and that was the only real negative in his profile. And ever since then, he's missed some time with the Chicago Bears. The Bears obviously went balls to the wall to improve their interior offensive line, and are now letting Tevin Jenkins leave and test the market. So there's questions with him, right? There's definitely questions with him, but there's still a market for him, and the Bengals are a part of that market. And it seems like they're interested enough to have maybe potentially offered him a contract as of today, and are kind of waiting to hear back from him as he's negotiating with other teams. But Anthony, I think that I wasn't necessarily expecting Tevin Jenkins, considering the durability concerns, considering that for the most part, they are targeting free agents that either A, have a connection with them, as evidenced by P. Ryan and TJ Sladen, who have played under their coaches before, or B, a lot of the offensive linemen that they've signed in past years have experience of being a part of postseason runs and experience winning. And that's a commonality with a lot of their free agents. Tevin Jenkins doesn't really check either of those boxes, but he's clearly the most talented guard available in free agency. And honestly, it's a lot like Lyle Collins, who had durability concerns coming from the Cowboys. A lot like Trent Brown, who had durability concerns coming from the Patriots. It's a similar type of profile there, even though Tevin Jenkins is younger than both of them. So it's kind of weighing the positives and negatives of a definite ceiling raiser for your offensive line, but comes with concerns. And there's a reason why I think the Bengals aren't totally just wanting to win a bidding war for services necessarily.
They're great points. There are two aspects that I look at the Tevin Jenkins thing where I say, okay, you mentioned the back thing coming into the draft, and then, you look at the missed games and injury situations in the NFL. And, oh, by the way, the Bears offensive line issues aren't an indictment necessarily, at least wholly, on Tevin Jenkins when he's missing games, right? I mean, it's like, okay, he's got a respectable PFF score, respectable pass block score, etc. So that, and the Bengals have been burned by getting after guys in free agency, especially late, Trey Waynes and others, where, there's some injury history and they say, gosh, we just can't take that risk again. We can't, get to this, the guaranteed money aspect and all these other aspects where you say, okay, these are the sticking points. So I get that. But this is also where I say, okay, pursue Tevin Jenkins, but also this is why you hang on to a Cordell Volson. I know Cordell Volson has had not great PFF marks, and there's been mixed reviews, and that's being generous about stuff. That's where you say, okay, we can get a Tevin Jenkins, but we also have a Cordell Volson who can come in off the bench if there is an injury issue with Jenkins, God forbid. But that has to be the major sticking point, along with the devaluation. I don't want to say devaluation, but the lack of valuation of the guard position from the Bengals standpoint going forward. But they have a major question mark at right guard for the starting position there. And then, of course, can you improve the left guard spot? And then also a guy who I think embodies the definition of the word mercenary, Dalton Rice. Ruzilla here, and I hope I'm pronouncing that, Ruzilla 1. Why is the league so low on Dalton Reisner? He's just kind of bouncing around and is somewhat effective here and there. And I can't really get a read on what's going on with him either. But I think Jenkins is probably their target. Then they kind of pivot from there. But the guard positions need to be addressed by the Bengals. I think if you go Jenkins, that's where you say, okay, hanging on to Cordell Volson makes a lot of sense, because then you can have someone who is at least capable in a starting capacity and has starting experience at a guard position, should the injury issues that has plagued Jenkins throughout really the first handful of years in his career and in college, if those pop back up again.
Yeah, I think Volson was always going to stick around for the first part of the offseason.
Right.
I was never really comfortable with them just trading him out of the gate or just cutting him because of salary increase because of the amount of snaps he's played in his first 3 years. I think he was always going to make it to camp, and Cody Ford was always going to come back to compete with him in a draft pick. I think there was always going to be some type of a competition at either left or right guard. Honestly, Anthony, I have no idea if whatever veteran they sign, I don't know if they're going to have him at right guard or have him at left guard and move the competition to right guard. I feel like that's more up in the air, but the safe bet is you're right. Like, it's those guys are going to be at left guard, and there's going to be a veteran at right guard, because that seems to be where the majority of the remaining options have a lot of their experience at. Tevin Jenkins has played on both sides. He played mostly, I think he played all left guard last year, but he does have experience at right guard. He's played well there in the past. As far as Reisner goes, he played under Justin Riscati, who is the Bengals pass game coordinator at both Denver when he was an offensive assistant and with the Minnesota Vikings when he was the assistant offensive line coach. He was available last year as a free agent after they hired Riscati, and they didn't sign him. And with the weird thing with Reisner is that he just signs really late in free agency. I think last year he signed in the summer. I don't know if just teams like hate him as a person but respect him as a player, so they just roster him anyways. There were rumors about the Bengals wanting to draft him in the first place back in 2019. I really don't know what the case is with him, but he's 30 years old. He's always been consistent, and he's not going to cost that much. So I think he should be one of the pivot options if they don't get Jenkins, along with a guy like Brandon Scherf. Or if that bridge isn't burnt, Kevin Zeitler should still be in the mix as well.
I am worried about the Zeitler bridge because of, a lot of people are like, oh, Zeitler, he can come back. I mean, was he even offered I think the reports were he was not even offered a contract after his rookie year. So
he was not, but then he was lowballed, I think, when they tried to get him back in 2021. So
shocking.
Yeah.
Absolutely shocking. But no, the Bengals need to do, some work here on the offensive line. I think that's where they will focus. Again, they don't want to go into the draft with a lot of needs. And then late in the day on Tuesday, the NFL announced that the compensation picks for previous year's free agency were announced. The Bengals did not get any, and we know they love to hoard those things. I don't know how this plays into the mix. It'll probably go into our next segment here a little bit, but they didn't get any, and not to be surprised, DJ Reader, I think, was in and out of the lineup for the Lions. And again, kind of like last year, there wasn't a ton of Bengals players that just got super, super courted. I mean, you can go back and say Jesse Bates and all that kind of stuff, but this year, especially going into this year, you can kind of bank on this. So I'm not surprised. I guess, again, knowing how the Bengals operate, I say, well, what does this do then to free agency? What does this do to the draft? What is this, and again, you've got Trey Hendrickson potentially seeking a trade out there. We're going to break that down in a second. What does that mean for all of that? Does that mean more aggression in free agency? Does that mean more aggression in trying to trade Trey Hendrickson? Because I have to think, though, that they kind of knew that this was coming down the pike, that they were not going to get at least anything sizable in the compensation pick area. So again, when you're talking about either rental options at guard or defensive tackle options, that sort of thing, the Bengals once again have fewer picks than they're accustomed to coming in this year's class.
Yeah, like they knew that nothing was going to happen there. Like, they signed, I think, 5 qualifying free agents last year, and they only lost 3. It's calculated based off of just how much those signings are worth on an average annual value, and they kind of cancel all out. So yeah, they knew that they weren't going to get any picks this year, which is unfortunate because right now they only have 6 picks, which would be the fewest that they've had in the draft since they traded up twice in 2022 and only had 6. So yes, like that was something that like they just kind of had to eat because of what they did last year. But you're right, like they're like both Sheldon Rankins and Alex Kappa aren't going to count because they were cut prior to free agency. They were technically street free agent signings. The only one is Keen Davis-Gaither, who signed, a decent deal, but I think already TJ Slaton has canceled that out on his own, and that doesn't include obviously Samaje Perine or Oren Burks there. So I think right now they're still in a position where they're not going to get any compensatory picks next year, anyways. But yeah, with Trey, like I really don't. I was, how do I want to say this? When they granted his request, I was pretty convinced that he was going to be gone because that's such a rare thing for them to do. And I don't think they've ever done it before. They've never granted a player his actual trade request, permission to seek out a trade and let him do that. I think the only reason why they did it, though, is because Trey's camp, according to Albert Breer, said that they could get back a first-round pick. Not only just sign him to a $30 million per year type deal, but also that team would trade them back a first-round pick in return. And if it hasn't happened by now, it's probably not going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, I don't think the Bengals are going to be too willing to part ways with by far their best pass rusher for what could be a day 2 pick. If their sights were set on a first-round pick, which, in my opinion, was completely foolish for them to believe that anyways, then I don't think that they're going to be very inclined to trade him. And this could be a situation where maybe they do come back to the table in a Matthew Stafford type deal. Or the worst case scenario, you could look at Trey just not being happy at all and then be potentially holding out for the offseason, which, yay, we'd get to do that again, right? So this whole thing, I think, is not been handled well by Trey's camp. If it was based off of just pure speculation and hope that a team would be desperate enough to give him a first-round pick, it doesn't sound like that side of the deal or that side of these negotiations have been doing quite good business, and I think it might come back to bite them.
Before I crown you the king of the segue here, Tony Rose in our YouTube chat says SI just reported. I don't know if that's all Bengals SI, and the great James Rapine and company just reported that it's down to the Bengals, Giants, and Seahawks for Jenkins. They estimate the deal would probably need to be 3 years in the $40 to $45 million range. But I will crown you now the king of the segue because we are talking about Trey Hendrickson. And man, I'm not in the business of scathing representation or anything like that, but man, this is not gone the way that Trey Hendrickson over the past couple of years that Trey Hendrickson would have liked. And now, John, as we sit here on Tuesday evening, Joey Bosa signed, right? Chase Young has been scooped off the market. Azeez Ojulari is still out there, but I think the Bengals pivoted to Joseph Osai per reports, and I think there's probably a somewhat similar skill set there that you say, okay, now I think both sides have some leverage, right? Where Trey Hendrickson's camp can say, well, this edge market is really dried up. Well, also from the Bengals side, we gave you permission for a week to go seek a trade, and it was not netting what we wanted. So now Trey Hendrickson, still a Bengal, and there has been minimal chatter from a number of different reports on trades there. I don't want to be hot take guy, but I did say to somebody early Monday morning, I said, I don't think that I think Trey Hendrickson stays a Bengal one way or the other, whether it's because of hardball negotiations and he plays this last year out, or they're just not getting the interest out there. Hendrickson's camp is not getting the interest out there that contractual or draft picks. Am I crazy in thinking that at this point, especially now with the edge market drying up?
No, the messaging behind this was when Trey went public back in February saying, hey, either pay me or trade me. Like, I understood that, right? He has certainly outplayed the contract that he's on right now, and the Bengals should be paying him. And this shouldn't have taken this long to get to this point. The fact that reportedly they offered him something far lower than any of us would have offered him is inexcusable, right? It shouldn't have to come to this point. Their process is definitely not good. And I think when they granted that request for him to seek out a trade, it sounded like they were very willing to just take whatever the best offer was going to be, even if that wasn't the first round pick. But new information has come out, and I think the situation has changed because of that, because we're a little bit more enlightened about it now. And maybe that was always the case with the Bengals. If they weren't going to get a first round pick, then they weren't going to trade him anyways. And I think Trey just has to eat that. If he in his camp said that, hey, we could get this done. Let us try to get this done and try to get this deal out there for you, so both sides come out of this with a win-win. If the Bengals don't win, then they're not going to let him go, and he's going to have to play on the deal regardless of what happens.
Yeah, never. They will not come out the losers on these, and I think they went into that not only as a goodwill gesture, saying, "Hey, go see what you can get," but also with a little bit of leverage. But then I think Hendrickson's camp did get a little bit of leverage with the edge market drying up a little bit. So we'll see if the Bengals and the Hendrickson camp can come to some sort of agreement. The same can be said about T. Higgins. There have been reports, some by Paul Dehner Jr. and others, saying that was going to be done by the beginning of this week. That has now since dragged on a little bit, and things change. We know that. So we'll see what happens there. Again, I think the Jamar Chase thing is, I don't know that that's the number one priority, but I don't think it's like, hey, the clock is ticking here. We have to do this because of free agency, the draft, etc., as it is with T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson. I think, again, it's just the Bengals potentially are asking a lot, and teams understand that. They're going to try and give what they think is fair, and the Bengals may or may not say yes or no.
Yeah, and I think the best case here is even if Trey's camp can't get back a first-round pick, because I think that was probably never going to happen. It certainly is going to happen now after a couple days on the open market and everything like that. If they can't do that, but at least they've been talking to other teams and said, hey, Team X is offering me this deal in this range. Team Y is offering me this deal in this range. It's clearly a lot more than what you guys are offering. If you're not going to trade me, can we at least get closer to the range that I'm asking for?
The numbers, yeah.
And now you have clarity that this is my market and you're clearly undervaluing me. So if you want me to play, can you at least get closer to this number? I think that I don't want to I don't want to make a prediction and have the Bengals do something that's positive here, but I think that could happen. It's not going to be that they pay him again what he probably deserves and what any of us listening or talking about this would have offered him a month ago. But I think they can raise the price a little bit because they have more clarity that this is what he's actually worth. That's possible.
It's possible. And I forgot to pay my electric bill, apparently. Let's drop the mic and get on out of here, John. I've got a couple of things, but I don't know if you've got something for us on the second night of free agency.
I don't know if he wants me to share this or not. I don't think he would mind, but we did bring up his name very early on. Orlando Brown Jr. actually slid into my DMs the other day, and he said, quote, "Appreciate your content, bro. Keep doing your thing." And that was really cool because obviously he doesn't follow me, but somehow he has been reading my stuff and he's following along. And that was really cool because the only other DM I've gotten from a player in my life was Quinn Spain back in 2020. And he had issue with a little film breakdown that I did about him. And we kind of talked it out and hashed it out. He ended up being a pretty chill dude. But Orlando Brown Jr., I really appreciate that, man. Thanks, man.
Well, hopefully he remembers our great time with him. We again, hey, can you give us 10, 15 minutes? And then, 30, 35 goes by. But I've got a couple of things. Number one, free agency in this tampering period made me think about some things with, remember the whole deal of courting free agents where you would fly them out and you take them to the best restaurant and you show them around town, you show them around the facilities. And this tampering period is not even about that. It's just show me the money, right? Show me the money and make it make sense, right? The other thing that I want to say, and John, he's in our intro there a little bit, and a guy we've had on our show, former Cincinnati Bengals linebacker / edge defender. Apparently, David Pollock's wife is battling some form of brain cancer. Don't know how serious it is. Again, I don't want to spill the tea on private matters, family matters on people, but he did put it out publicly on Twitter. A great guy, a guy who just, exudes character, exudes a lot of different things. And I just want to say, if there are things we can do as, Bengals fans, followers of the show, whether it's, I don't know if he's got a donation platform. I know we set one up a while ago for his foundation, but if there's something we can do aside from prayers, positive vibes, etc., that would be great, because he's a great guy. That is a horrific thing that he and his family are going through. When I saw that, my heart broke. But I'm hoping and knowing that the best is yet to come for he and his family.
It's the one of the few enemies that everyone shares. Cancer just stinks. And there's nothing more to say about it. So David is an extremely religious and spiritual person. I think he would appreciate anyone who feels the same to give him all the thoughts that he has in any way that we can help him out or support a cause that he cares about, or just support him. I think we'd be best inclined to do it. So we're thinking about him.
Absolutely. John, you're the man. Thank you for coming on so late. Thank you. Good Lord, we've got a lot of live viewers here. People are interested in the Bengals and free agency, and we are flattered by the amount of live viewers we have, especially this late in the evening. We are past 11 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday. We're going to be back with more updates and different things as it pertains to the Cincinnati Bengals, as it pertains to NFL free agency. Again, you can get this show on a number of different platforms, whether that is your favorite audio streamer, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all of those ones. We're on there, on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, BLEAV. You got to go get that. Leave us a review, subscribe to it if you could. You've got our show, you've got Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends, you've got 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, and you also have the great Willie Lutz and the coach Matt Minnick talking football. They know ball. They know ball. So go check that out. And of course, if you like the video side of things, Cincy Jungle's Facebook, the YouTube channel, go click that, do all the things. We appreciate all of you tuning in. Keep it to both cincyjungle.com and A to Z Sports, where John is killing it with the content for the AFC North and the Cincinnati Bengals. John, I thank you, buddy. I'm now a silhouette here, but I thank you, buddy, for coming on late, and appreciate all of your insight as always. You are the brains behind this operation. The comments say so, my friend.
Yeah, whatever. Next time we're back on, I think the Bengals will sign someone else, so we'll have something to talk about.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. We'll see. Take care, everybody.